I started out, like probably everybody, in the command and control mode, and that's because society, that's what they teach us. And of course, I then went through the U.S. Naval Academy, and they reinforced all of that. And I spent my first 12 years using that mode. And basically, that's figuring out what my next order is. That's what I spent most of my time doing, running around finding what was not being done correctly or not being done, and then giving the orders and following up. That was command and control. But all during that entire 12 years, I realized that I really could not greatly increase the performance of my worst and my middle level performers. I really thought that they should be able to be brought up very close to my best performers. It was my father who basically taught me that I could be a technical giant and really understand things technically at a young age, but would never understand people if I didn't spend a lot of time and effort doing it. I was a member of the nuclear Navy, and we ran nuclear reactors and a lot of science involved. And you really had to understand cause and effect, and we all realized that understanding why was probably much more important than understanding what. And read a book, and that book pointed out to me a fact. And that fact was that the workforce was the sun, and the management was the earth rotating around the sun, meaning that the workforce was a hell of a lot more important than the management. Now, I hadn't really thought of it that way. And I had always told my people, hey, you're only here to support me and do what I want to do and carry out what I want done. So, go do that. So as soon as I went back to sea, I had command of a destroyer escort. When I took it over, I started listening to the people. And it was pretty simple. And they had concerns, and I found that most of them were valid. So I went about trying to resolve them. Now, as I did that, their performance really started to rise. And the more I did it, the more their performance rose. In 18 months, we went from being one of the worst ships to being one of the very best. Their performance rose by over 2 times higher than I had thought was humanly possible. Well, I left the ship and went on to my next duty station after 18 months. And a year later, one of the officers called me up and said, Captain, I know you're not going to like this, but the ship is about in the same condition as it was when you reported aboard the first time. We've gone right back to being one of the worst again. Now that really made me upset. I was supposed to have had a solution that would last. I started to realize that people, 95% of them are followers. And really we'll call them conformists, because society forces them to conform or else, and so to escape the or else, they conform. Well, when they do that, they're really not their own person anymore, and they're really trying to figure out what the value standards are that they experience in the workplace, and use those value standards as how they do their work. In other words, if your support for your people reflects the highest standards, that's what they're going to achieve. And if it reflects disrespect for them, and we don't really care about them, and we don't care about much of anything but ourselves, and we're all wrapped up in the boss, it's for the boss, like I was during my first 12 years, then they're going to be led right back down again. So they will follow the lead no matter what. Now that's the 95%. How about the 5%? And I'm a 5%er. I was born that way. I'm going to decide based on my value standards and what I believe is right to do, not on what you want. Now, if you're my boss, I'm certainly going to give deference to you. But I'm going to fight for the things that I think are right, and I'm not going to follow bad leadership. No way am I going to follow that, because I do have to live by my own value standards. If you can convert everybody to being that kind of a person, I just call it a non-follower, then you have people who are going to be self-sustained. They're not going to change when you get bad leadership. When I first retired from the military, I had this powerhouse, about 250 people. They hated management, the union did, and management, I think, hated the union. And by the time I finished 2.5 years ago, after that, we were setting all the records. I mean, it was a terrible place when I got there, absolutely terrible. But in 2.5 years, we were setting all the records. I watched it for 7 years after I left it. And every time I went back there, they were setting records all the time. And they went through 3 bosses during that 7 years. 2 of them were highly political. It would have been the worst leadership possible. But they sustained the operation all the time. The place was clean as a whistle all the time. They were setting operational records. So I know that once you convert these people into being non-followers, you've really done something fantastic. I'd say, what are your complaints, suggestions, and questions? They'd start giving them to me, and then I would ask them for the solutions. Okay. I wanted them to use their brain power to figure things out. It's your job. Why don't you figure it out? And I'd point at them, I'd always have 40, 50 people in the room. And I knew some of the non-followers. And I could always go to them. I'd say, Jim, don't you know the solution? Yes, sir, blah, 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 blah. And the followers realized, gee, I don't want to always just be quiet and not have anything to say. So they had to start using their brain. Now, if you want to understand the effects of all this, I had a man who was a union steward, shop steward, walked into my office after about 1.5 years. He was very well known as being anti-management, really against it. And as far as I was concerned, he had every reason in the world to do that. But he walked into my office. He was considered to be a hard worker. Walks in my office, says, Ben, I don't know what you do. I don't want to know what you do. I only want you to continue doing whatever it is you are doing. Because for 15 years, I hated to come to work. And I love coming to work now. Wow. The real effect is not only on this great productivity, it's the effect on the individual. Their personal life. I had women walk up and say, you know, you gave me back my husband. Mm. When you convert them to being non-followers, you're literally turning the workplace over to them, because they can influence everything, because you're listening to them and responding to them. So when you make them into their own person and being a non-follower, that just makes their whole life light up.